Welcome back to Get Git, Introduction to Version Control with Git and GitHub. I'm Evan Williamson again, Digital Infrastructure Librarian at University of Idaho. We're on the second video, so if you need the introduction, jump back in the playlist and find the first one. This section, we're going to talk about getting started on GitHub, what it is, and then do a walkthrough of kind of using that web interface to see how we can use Git in the cloud on the web on this project, right, on this platform, GitHub. So what is GitHub? GitHub's a really popular web service for hosting Git repositories. So basically it's a place to store and sync up all your work in the cloud with a whole bunch of benefits and features built in. And it's going to provide a really handy web interface for editing and collaborating on Git repositories. And it has a whole bunch of built-in project management features, access controls. So this is really helpful for when you're collaborating with folks, and static web hosting and a whole bunch of other little add-ons and features that you can use to help your project. So GitHub is where the distributed part of Git gets really cool. So rather than just having these repository and this version control happening on your local machine, what you're going to do is have a centralized repository hosted on GitHub, and then you're going to pull that repository down to your local machine to work, and then you're going to keep syncing your work back up onto the web, which is going to make it possible for you to collaborate with anyone across the world or with yourself on multiple computers, and you're never going to get out of sync with your project. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that Git, the version control system, is not the same thing as GitHub, which is a web hosting platform. These are two separate things. It's easy to kind of get them intertwined and confused, but just try to keep that division clear. So the first step is that you're going to have to go over and get yourself a GitHub account. Just visit github.com, sign up for a free account. The free accounts is all you need. You do not need a paid account. There is additional features in these subscription pricing models, but for your everyday kind of average use, you really do not need one of these paid level accounts. If you are an educator, you can also, or a student, there is free upgrades that you can apply for using your student emails or your faculty email, and they can upgrade you to a paid account for free. So that's handy if it's something that you're interested in using. Once you sign up on github.com, be sure to go check your email. They send you a verification email that you'll have to click a button to verify your email before all of the features get fully kind of activated on your account. The one thing I want to say is, while you're signing up, think a little bit about what email and what your username is going to be, because if this is going to be professional work that you do on the platform, you want to think that through. Is it tied to your crazy social media account, or is it tied to some sort of professional profile that you want to put out there, that's tied to your CV and your resume? So think about that a bit before you sign up. And the last thing is that keep in mind that while you're using Git and when you're using GitHub, your email and your username are going to be recorded with every commit. This is really helps with the integrity and the authenticity of the history and sort of transparency. And most people on GitHub do keep their emails public. However, if you do have any concerns about that being out there in the open, you can check GitHub's tips on how to set up your email privacy. It basically can provide you a no reply email, something like you would have on Craigslist, and then you can use that email in your Git commits and set that up through GitHub. So that is an option that's out there. So take a second, pause the video, make sure you have a GitHub account if you don't have it already set up, because now we're going to just kind of walk through using the web interface and doing our first set of commits and creating some files and editing them here on this web platform. And this is all kind of a preamble to learning Git on our local machine. And there's a reason for this, because in a typical Git workflow, you'll usually start by creating that project on GitHub, because you want to start that remote repository first, get it set up, because you and your collaborators will want this central place to be able to clone and sync up all your work. And so you're going to start on GitHub, create a repository, and then in your normal workflow, you will be copying that down to your local machine to do work on the files, and then you'll push the changes that you've made on your local machine back up to the GitHub remote. And that's kind of the normal workflow. So we're going to start on GitHub before we even do anything on our local machine. And we don't even have Git installed yet on our local machine. That's the next video. So the best way to start learning Git is going to follow that workflow. Let's create a repository on GitHub. So I'm going to go over in my browser. I'm going to hop over to GitHub. You can see that I am logged in because my name is up here. And you can see that this is my homepage, is kind of a feed of activities that I'm involved in, other repositories that I follow, other people that I follow. So that's kind of a feed. And so when you start out, you're probably not going to see something like this. You're not going to really have anything showing up. But you will have this bar up here, and you should have a bar here to get you started with creating some new repositories. So to start a new repository, what we're going to do is click this plus icon that's up in the nav bar on the right hand side, and we're going to choose from the drop down this option that says new repository. So if we click there, it's going to kick us over to essentially a form that we need to fill out to set up this new repository. And so this new repository is essentially the home base for this project that we're going to track. In this project, think of it really as a folder files. So it's usually topical. It's usually some specific project that you're working on. It won't have different parts of different projects. Sometimes you might have a project that's broken into a couple chunks where it makes sense to have those as their own set of folders. But this folder is a set of files that you're going to want to track together. So start just thinking about what this repository is, what is going to go into it. And so we're going to start out here. And we scroll down, and there's a spot here that says owner. Right now, you should just have your own name in there, your own GitHub user account. I actually I'm a member of a whole bunch of organizations, which is a great feature on GitHub. And there's some notes in the outline there about setting up organizations. So you could choose a different owner if you're a member of some organizations. And then right here is the repository name. So this is what we're going to call that folder of files. And the conventions that you're going to use to name these folders might change depending on the kind of project that you're working on and maybe your field of study, how people name things. But basically, it just has to be a unique name within your account. I usually, to make life simpler, I don't use any spaces in there. I don't use any strange characters. And a lot of my work is for the web, so I'm using lowercase, kind of web-safe type names. So I'm just going to do a name here. Demo repo today is going to be the name of my new repository. This is optional description. Right here, you're going to have a choice between public and private. The rules around this kind of change, but basically it's always free to have public repositories on GitHub. Private ones, I believe free accounts have ability to have some private repositories now. But in general, just keep it public unless this is something that really shouldn't be seen in the public. People aren't just navigating around and snooping on all of your code. GitHub is a gigantic repository of open source code, so public is kind of the default, and that's where I would go. The next thing that's really important here is to click this option that says add a README file. So we're going to initialize the repository, and we're going to have add a README to it. And that's going to add one file into this repository so that we can get started right away working on it. And then you can ignore the rest of this and scroll down to this green button right here. It says create repository. On GitHub, green buttons are usually good things. And so you're going to want to click that to finish off creating this repository. So you've created a name, we've made it public, we're adding a README, we're going to click the green button to create that repository. So now here we are on our brand new fancy repository. This is again essentially our folder of files that we have on the web. And this main page for your repository, kind of the home page of your repository, is the code tab on GitHub. And this is essentially just a representation of this folder of files. In this case, we have a folder, and this is the name of our repository. And inside that folder, we just have one file right here. We have a single file called README .md. And then you're going to see that this readme.md is actually displayed down below. And so this is a convention that's used in many code projects. A README is a place for you to kind of write the basics about your repository so that users that come there can understand what it's going to contain, who made it, and any other kind of information that they should know. Sometimes it could be some quick start documentation, sometimes it'll be some licensing information, sometimes it'll just be metadata about this repository so that you kind of have a context of what's going on. And a lot of times it's notes to yourself in the future to remember what this is all about. So on GitHub, READMEs are usually written in Markdown, which is a simplified format for writing on the web. And you can use Markdown everywhere on GitHub, in issues, in comments, and then in Markdown files, and it's going to display nicely on the web there. And so if you're not familiar with Markdown, there is some notes on the outline about Markdown and some resources for learning about it, and it's well worth taking a few minutes to learn about it. It's not complicated, and it really is a great way to write in a simplified format. So we're going to go ahead and edit this file that we have in this repository. So we're going to edit this readme.md using GitHub's built-in web editor. So I'm going to look here, and I have this is my folder, and I have this one file in here, and I'm just going to click on that file name. That takes me over to essentially the file's homepage, and it's going to display the rendered content of this file right here. In this case, because it's a Markdown file, it's rendering it into HTML that looks kind of nice. And we're going to click this pencil icon that's kind of right here on the right corner of this file box. And that's going to open the web editor. So this pencil icon, click that. And what it opens is a kind of text editor on this web page. So it's similar to Notepad or TextEdit that you might have on your computer. And it's a plain text editor. It's just very simple. So this is some Markdown. You can see that this hash and then the space and then some text, that's a header, so an H1 in this case. So I'm going to just press enter to make a line under it. I'm going to put another line by pressing enter again, and then I'll just write a new paragraph, and I can just start writing some demo content. This is a demo repo for Git. Okay, so I've added some content in this box. Just paste something in there, do some writing, whatever you want. You've made some changes. Okay, so now what we need to do, we scroll down, and below this little file editor, we're going to get to this box that says commit changes. And so this little form is essentially the form to make your commit, your Git commit. And so the first thing that we need to do is that every commit, as I said, is going to record a person. So this person that's logged in, which is me. The time, it's going to automatically capture that. The changes that are made, so the stuff that I just did up there. And then we also always need to give it a message, a commit message. And so this commit message is just to describe the changes that you just did. And it's really a message to your future self, to your collaborators, to your future collaborators, so that they can understand the code, why you made this change, what it did to the project. And so in this case, we're just going to say, added some content to the README. And then to finish this commit, we've given our message. We get down to this green button that says commit changes. So message, green button, commit changes, click that button, and bang, it's done. We've made a Git commit. So congrats. Hopefully that was your first commit. You've actually used Git, even though it was on the web. And we added one of these commits, one of these snapshots of our repository into the history of a repository. So let's just kind of repeat that by adding a new file into our repository. So if we go, if you click on the name of your repository or on this code tab here, we're going to get back to kind of the home page of our repository. And in this case, let's go to the add file menu. It's kind of here on the right side of the box of the files. So if we click add file, we have a couple options here. We can upload files from our local computer, or we can create a new file. So let's choose create a new file. This again is going to open up that web editor that we already saw, but in this case we don't have a file name for the file yet because it doesn't exist. So we need to type in the file name, and you can see it starts here with this folder, the repository's name, and then we're just going to type in the file that we want to add, the file name that we want to add. So I'm going to do example.md. So that .md is the file name extension for Markdown, and so I'm just going to use that again. So I'm going to use example.md. And again, in file names, you want to think about file names. Typically, if it's a web project, you want it to be all lowercase and no spaces. There's different conventions depending on the type of code you're writing or the type of project that you're working on. And then after I've put in a file name, I'm just going to click down here into this editor box, and I'm just going to start editing or adding some content again. This is just demo content. So I'm going to make a hash space, header 1. So this is just writing some Markdown. So just add some content into that file. And now we've added some changes here. We've added some content in the file. We're going to scroll back down to the commit new file, this commit box. And again, we need to give a message. So I'm just going to describe what I'm doing, what changes this commit is going to add to this repository, kind of why. So there really is an art to commit messages. How useful they are, is going to be, it's valuable in the future when you look back on that history. If you do a good job on these commit messages, there's a lot of times in our commit histories in projects that I've worked on where they are not very useful, not very meaningful, or products of frustration, and so that is normal, but there is an art to the commit. You want it to be short, meaningful, and descriptive so that people can understand what's happened and kind of why you did it. And again, get down to this green button to commit the new file. And so I'll click that. And now we're back here on our main code homepage for our repository. And now you can see in this box we actually have two files. We have the README and we have example.md. So we have two files. We've made a couple commits in our repository. And so let's take a look at the history as it appears on GitHub. So this is this little file box, and you're going to see in this corner of it, there's this little area that says 3 commits on the right-hand side of that sort of file listing area. And so if you click on that, it's going to bring us to the commits page, which is just a sequential listing of all of the commits that have been made in this repository so far. And so we have 3 commits: the one that created the repository, this one where we edited the README, and then this last one where we just added a new file into the repository. And if we click on any of these messages or on this hash right here, you will get over to a representation of exactly what happened on that commit. And so here's this message. This big long number is a hash that is the identifier of the commit. So Git in the background is storing a little identifier for each of these commits, and that's a way to uniquely identify it in the system. And then below that, you're going to see a diff, which is what are the changes that were actually made in the repository. And we can say 1 file was changed and 3 additions means that there was 3 lines added. So this green is showing lines that were added to the repository. So I can take a look at this other one where we edited the README, and again it's showing the changes that were made in this diff, and it's really a nice way to see the exact changes that were made by that commit and understand what was happening. So that's our first foray into Git using GitHub and this web interface that's there. I just wanted to introduce a few more things and orient you to using GitHub, because this is a really great tool for project management and collaboration. And so, take a minute to explore all these little tabs that you have here available to you. The first one that I want to show is the Issues tab. So if you click on the Issues tab, this is a little tool where you can create a threaded discussion, is what it's called officially. And so if you click on this green button to create a new issue, you'll have a title. So I'm going to say example issue, and then you're going to describe what the problem is, or what the thing that you want to track is, or the discussion that you want to start with your collaborators or with yourself. So maybe I'll say things to finish, and then we can use Markdown to write it. And in this case, I'm going to add a kind of to-do list, which is something that that GitHub has built into this. And then I'm going to submit the new issue by clicking the green button. And so now if you look in this Issues tab, we're going to have this list of all the issues that people have opened. Sometimes people from the outside will open it if they are using your code and they run into a problem and they want to communicate with you. They can open it there. Sometimes your collaborators could open it and they can tag your name in there to make sure that you're aware of something that needs to be done or discussed. And you can see here that we have this task list and we can check them off. And as we do it, and it's showing how that status. And so this is a really neat tool that's built in. I like it for tracking my work and my to-do lists, tracking ideas so I don't forget about it. It's just right here in the repository. I don't have to go look in my notes somewhere else. It's great for tracking bugs and then creating these kind of task lists that you can share. You can also use this in conjunction with the Projects tab, which is something similar to like a Trello board, and you can combine your issues into these project boards to really do some pretty good project management using the system. There's also a wiki built in if you want to write some documentation that's separate from your project code or keep notes. This Insights tab is going to give you some statistics about who's involved and who's created commits inside of your repository. And so I'm the top contributor to this project so far, because obviously we don't have any collaborators and we just created it a second ago. But this can be really interesting to understand the background of your repository, the work that's gone on, and all your collaborators. And the last thing here is the Settings tab. This is where you can have all kinds of options. If you do want to delete something like this demo repository, you scroll way down and you're going to find those options here. Delete the repository, the red button, so it means take caution on GitHub. And then if you need to add collaborators, this is where you're going to find it in Settings. Manage access. You're going to have to confirm your password, and then you will be able to add invite people to be your collaborators. And so you're going to add them using their GitHub username. So this is somebody that I know, and I use their GitHub username to find them. I'm going to click on their name, and it will add them. It will invite them to become collaborators on the project. The person that you invite will actually will get a notification or an email, and they'll actually have to accept that invitation to join your repository. And essentially, you're just going to give them direct access to that repository. They have the same levels of access as you do, and there is some abilities to kind of manage the levels of access that different people have to that repository. So this is a really powerful tool for collaboration and setting up people, giving them access to your code, or controlling the amount of access that they have to your code. One final little feature that I wanted to highlight here on this repository before we move on into the next video is that there is a handy tool built in. In general, your workflow is that you're going to set up your repository here on GitHub, and then you're going to clone it down to your local machine, and you're going to do that work on your local machine using whatever tools are on your computer that you actually want to work on this project with. But if you do want to do some extensive editing on the web, that web editor that we just used to create some files is not the most convenient or helpful to use. You don't want to do a bunch of editing with that. But you can now open up a web editor called the github.dev, which is a browser-based text editor. It's basically a really light version of Visual Studio Code Editor, and you don't have to install anything. All you have to do is click period on any repository, and it'll take just a second for it to load up this web editor version of Visual Studio Code. And so now I'm looking at my repository that we were just looking at on GitHub in a editor, a kind of more complete text editor. So here's our files, and we can start editing them. And then there's this tabs over here, and we'll have our version control here, and we can add this change and give a commit message. And I will commit. And so this is a really handy tool to work with your repository on GitHub. That's just kind of built in. So if you go back to this outline, you're going to get down to the bottom of the outline here. I do have some resources listed for you here to learn more. GitHub Guides is kind of quick reference. This GitHub Learning Labs has really in-depth interactive lessons to go deeper into understanding GitHub and Git in general. There's a link to GitHub Education where there is some ways that you can use GitHub in the classroom and also just get some benefits as an educator or student. And then here's some information about GitHub organizations, which are really useful if you're going to collaborate with some folks, if you want to have a kind of branded area to group together a set of related projects. And especially important in a situation of, say, an academic lab where your people are leaving and coming and going on a regular basis. You want to be able to have that continuity of keeping that code under an organization, owned by an organization, rather than individuals that might leave your organization and then you lose access to a project. So do make use of GitHub organizations if that's of value to you. Here's some resources on Markdown. And the last thing that I want to highlight is the fact that, Git and GitHub are not the only options for version control out there. There is other version control systems, Subversion, Mercurial. Although at this point, Git is by far taken over as the most popular version control system used on projects. In academic projects, in web development projects, in software development projects. So most people are using Git by a pretty large majority, but there is other options out there and some newer ones that have come out recently. There is other repository hosts other than GitHub. Now GitHub is, again, by far the most popular and the largest, but Bitbucket is another large one that is commonly used. GitLab is one that is commonly used, and many people have it as a self-hosted version of GitLab. And there is a number of other repository hosts that are popping onto the scene right now that have different types of features and highlights and ability to host it yourself if you don't want to take part in the ecosystem that is GitHub. So we're focusing today on Git and GitHub. The lessons that you learn really can apply to the same to the other platforms and the other version control systems, because it's a very similar approach to how that work is done. So keep that in mind when you're making your choices out there. And this is the end to our introduction to GitHub. and we have to jump in to actually learning about Git. We have a repository now on GitHub that we're going to use for a demo, and we need to take that down to our local machine using Git and start working on it. And so that's going to be the next video. Tune in, and hopefully we'll see you there. Thank you, and take care.